When did your teacher give everyone a free A+? Mrs. Lambert walked into class with tears streaming down her face and slammed her coffee mug on the desk so hard it broke. If one of you can find the woman my husband is cheating on me with, I will give you an A+ for the semester, and you can stop doing work. Just please help me catch her so I can deliver justice. Someone in the back raised their hand slowly and asked if that was really all they had to do. Mrs. Lambert nodded and laid out 3 rules. 1. We couldn't get caught snooping around. 2. We couldn't break into anyone's homes. And 3. We could work in teams if we wanted. The bell rang right after, and my best friend Kenji grabbed my arm and pulled me into the hallway. He said, "I got a plan. This'll be easy money, trust me." Mrs. Lambert's husband was Coach Lambert, who taught gym and coached girls volleyball. Kenji figured he was probably sleeping with one of the volleyball players since he spent so much time with them after school. We decided to start our investigation that afternoon during volleyball practice. We snuck into the gym and hid behind the bleachers with a clear view of the court. Coach Lambert was running drills and yelling at the girls to hustle. He seemed normal at first, but then we noticed he kept touching the team captain's shoulder when explaining plays. The practice went on for an hour, and nothing suspicious happened. We were about to give up when Coach Lambert called the captain April into his office. She jogged over, bouncing her ponytail, and followed him inside. Through the window, we could see her tying her hair up in a bun while he made sure no one was looking, then turned off the lights and pulled down the blinds, blocking our view completely. Kenji and I looked at each other, knowing she was giving him the gawk gawk 3000. We quietly left the gym and started heading back to Mrs. Lambert's classroom to claim our A+. We were practically running down the hallway when we heard footsteps behind us. 2 kids from our class tackled us to the ground before we could react. They pinned us down while their teammate Jasmine sprinted ahead toward Mrs. Lambert's room. We struggled, but they were bigger and had caught us off guard. By the time we got free and made it to the classroom, Jasmine was already inside talking to the teacher. After Jasmine left looking smug, I went into the classroom alone. Mrs. Lambert was sitting at her desk crying harder than before. I told her what we'd seen with Coach Lambert and April in his office. She thanked me through her tears and said she'd suspected the volleyball team all along. But then I realized something off. I asked her, "Are you okay? Like, actually okay?" Mrs. Lambert looked up at me with surprise. She actually smiled a little through her tears and said I was the first student to ask how she was feeling. I apologized for not asking sooner and told her that even though she was a tough teacher, she didn't deserve to be cheated on. She stood up and walked around her desk. "Do you still want that A+?" she asked. I said yeah, of course, because who wouldn't want a free grade? But then her expression changed to something I couldn't read. She explained that since I was the only student who showed concern for her well-being, she wanted to give me a special choice. I could take the A+ for myself, but she'd tell everyone I ruined the challenge for them. Or I could fail the class, but everyone else would automatically get an A+ for their efforts. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I asked her to repeat what she'd said because it made no sense. Then the pieces started clicking together in the worst way possible. I looked at her face and saw she wasn't devastated anymore. She was studying my reaction like I was a lab rat in one of her psychology experiments. "Wait, so your husband's not cheating on you?" She laughed and shook her head, explaining this was an annual experiment for the psychology class. Before I could respond, another girl burst through the door. "Mrs. Lambert, you need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a photo that made the teacher's face go white. It showed Coach Lambert in the cafeteria kissing Mrs. Harden, the lunch lady. He was making out with her on top of the serving counter. The timestamp showed it was taken 20 minutes ago during lunch prep. Mrs. Lambert grabbed the phone with shaking hands and stared at the photo. Her face went through about 10 different emotions before settling on rage. She looked at me, and then at the girl who'd brought the photo. "This isn't part of the experiment. He's kissing my niece." The room went completely silent as Mrs. Lambert kept staring at the phone screen. Her fingers turned white from gripping it so hard. The girl who brought the photo took a step backward toward the door. Her sneakers squeaked on the floor. Mrs. Lambert's face changed from shocked to angry to something worse. She looked like she might throw the phone at the wall. Instead, she set it down carefully on her desk. Her hands were shaking bad. She picked up her desk phone and started dialing a number. Each button press sounded loud in the quiet room. "Silas, I need you in my classroom right now," she said into the phone. Her voice was scary calm, like when someone's about to lose it completely. She hung up without waiting for an answer. Then she turned to look at us. "Both of you sit down and don't move until the principal gets here." The other girl and I dropped into the nearest chairs. Neither of us wanted to argue with that tone. We sat there waiting while Mrs. Lambert paced behind her desk. Her heels clicked on the floor with each step. She kept looking at the photo, then looking away like it burned her eyes. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours before Principal McConnell walked through the door. He took one look at Mrs. Lambert's face and knew something was really wrong. "What happened?" he asked. Mrs. Lambert picked up the phone and showed him the picture without saying anything. His eyebrows went up when he saw what was on the screen. He looked at the photo, then at Mrs. Lambert, then back at the photo. "Is this who I think it is?" he asked. Mrs. Lambert just nodded. The principal turned to look at me and the other girl. I need both of you to write down exactly how you found this photo, he said. He pulled out 2 pieces of paper from Mrs. Lambert's desk drawer. Include everything you know about how this came to be. My hand was shaking as I started writing about the experiment Mrs. Lambert set up. I explained how she told us to find who her husband was cheating with. I wrote about the competition between students and the promise of an A+ grade. I described how this girl showed up with real proof when we thought it was all fake. The other girl was writing fast too, probably explaining how she got the photo. Mrs. Lambert suddenly started laughing, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and sharp like broken glass. I designed this whole thing to study competitive behavior in students, she said. I wanted to see how far you'd go for a grade. She shook her head and laughed again. Now I'm the one who got played by my own family. The principal read what we wrote, then looked at the unnamed girl. You can go back to class, he told her. Don't discuss this with anyone. She practically ran out of the room. Then he turned to me. You stay, he said. Mrs. Lambert tells me you were the only student who asked if she was actually okay. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from me. I need to know everything about this experiment and what other students might be doing. I told him about Kenji and how we went to watch volleyball practice. I explained how we thought Coach was doing something with a brill in his office. I told him about Jasmine and her team tackling us in the hallway. I described how everyone was competing for the grade and treating it like a game. The principal's frown got deeper with every detail I shared. He kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mrs. Lambert suddenly stood up from her desk. I need to go find my husband right now, she said. The principal held up his hand to stop her. If this involves a teacher having an inappropriate relationship during school hours, we need to handle this properly, he said. There are procedures we have to follow through official channels. Mrs. Lambert looked ready to argue, but then sat back down. The principal pulled out his phone and made a call. Maya, I need you in Mrs. Lambert's classroom immediately, he said. A few minutes later, Maya Estrada walked in. She was the school counselor who always wore bright colors and smiled a lot. But she wasn't smiling now. The principal explained the situation quietly to her. Maya's eyes got wider as he talked. She walked over to Mrs. Lambert and put a hand on her shoulder. I'll stay with her, Maya told the principal. He nodded and stood up. I'm going to find Coach Lambert, he said. Then he looked at me. You need to go to your next class and don't discuss this with anyone. He walked out looking determined. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. Mrs. Lambert called out to me before I left. Thank you for asking if I was okay, she said quietly. I nodded and walked into the hallway. The bell had already rung, so the halls were mostly empty. I made it about 10 feet before Kenji came running around the corner. He practically tackled me against the lockers. What happened with Mrs. Lambert? He asked. His eyes were wide with excitement. Did we get the A+? I shook my head. The experiment was real, but also not real, I told him. Coach is actually cheating, but not with who we thought. Kenji's jaw dropped open. Wait, what do you mean? He asked. I looked around to make sure no one was listening. He's cheating with the lunch lady who's actually Mrs. Lambert's niece, I said. Kenji stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Are you serious right now? He asked. I nodded and his face went pale. Kenji grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard, asking if I was joking because this was too crazy to be real. I told him I saw the photo myself, and Mrs. Lambert looked ready to kill someone. He let go and started pacing back and forth in the hallway, muttering about how messed up this whole thing was. The warning bell rang and we had to split up for our next classes, but Kenji made me promise to text him if anything else happened. I walked into my next class and everyone was already whispering about something going down in Mrs. Lambert's room. By the time I got to my locker after that period, word had spread through the whole school like someone set off a gossip bomb. Jasmine was waiting there with her arms crossed and this look on her face like she wanted to fight someone. She cornered me against the lockers, demanding to know if she still got the A+, since technically someone found the woman Coach was cheating with. I told her I had no idea what was happening with grades anymore and tried to push past her, but she blocked my way. She said her team did all that work tackling us and running to the classroom first, so they deserved something for their effort. I finally got around her and headed to the cafeteria for lunch, feeling weird about everything. Walking into the lunchroom felt different knowing what happened on that serving counter just an hour ago. The usual lunch lady, Mrs. Harden, wasn't there, and some substitute was serving food instead, looking confused about where everything was. Kids were already talking about how Mrs. Harden called in sick suddenly and wasn't answering her phone. I grabbed a tray and sat down but couldn't eat, thinking about that photo of Coach making out with her right where they serve our food. Kenji found me and pulled me aside, saying we had a problem because April was crying in the bathroom. He said everyone was saying she was hooking up with Coach Lambert because of what we saw in his office. The guilt hit me like a punch in the stomach, realizing we jumped to conclusions, and now an innocent person was getting hurt. I asked Kenji which bathroom, and he pointed down the hall, so I went to find her. Outside the girls' bathroom, I could hear crying and some other girls trying to comfort someone. I waited until a girl came out and asked her to tell April I needed to talk to her about Coach Lambert. She gave me a dirty look but went back inside, and a minute later April came out with red eyes and mascara running down her face. I told her I was sorry for thinking she was doing something with Coach, and that I knew now she wasn't the one he was cheating with. She wiped her eyes and said everyone was calling her names and saying horrible things about her. I explained about the photo of Coach with Mrs. Harden and how it was all a big misunderstanding about what we saw in his office. April got angry and said we should have minded our own business instead of spying on people and making assumptions. She was right, and I felt terrible. But then she said something that made me feel even worse. She told me Coach did cross boundaries sometimes with comments about how she looked in her uniform or touching her shoulder too much during practice. She said she never did anything with him, but she understood why people might think something was happening. I apologized again and promised to tell people the truth about her not being involved. She nodded and went back into the bathroom while I stood there feeling like garbage for hurting someone who was already dealing with a creepy coach. The rest of the day went by in a blur of people asking questions and spreading rumors about what really happened. The next morning, everything felt different at the school. Coach Lambert wasn't there, and some confused substitute gym teacher was trying to figure out the lesson plan. The volleyball team was standing around the gym not knowing if practice was canceled or what they should do. I heard them whispering about whether Coach got fired or just didn't show up. During Mrs. Lambert's class, she walked in looking completely different from before. She was professional but cold, like she'd turned into a robot overnight. She announced the experiment was officially over and everyone would be graded on their regular work from now on. Several students groaned and complained, but she shut them down with this look that could have frozen fire. Jasmine raised her hand and argued that someone technically completed the challenge by finding the woman, so someone should still get the A+. Mrs. Lambert stared at her for a long moment, then said the only thing anyone was getting was a lesson in why you shouldn't play games with people's lives. The whole class went silent, and Jasmine sank down in her seat looking defeated. After class, Mrs. Lambert asked me to stay behind while everyone else filed out. She thanked me for showing genuine concern earlier when I asked if she was okay. She said she was recommending me for the peer counseling program because I showed real empathy when others just saw opportunity. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and she handed me a form to fill out for the program. Later that day, the principal called an assembly about appropriate behavior and boundaries. He never mentioned any names, but everyone knew exactly what he was talking about. He announced new policies about teacher-student interactions and transparency in grading, saying there would be no more special deals or competitions for grades. After the assembly, Kenji found me looking upset about our whole investigation being for nothing. He complained that we did all that work and weren't getting the grade we were promised. I told him maybe we learned something more important than getting an easy A+. Kenji rolled his eyes and said, I sounded like an after-school special trying to find a lesson in everything. 2 days went by and neither Coach Lambert nor Mrs. Harden showed up to the school, which made the rumors go crazy with everyone guessing what happened to them. Some kids said they saw them at the airport running away together, while others claimed they both got fired on the spot, but nobody actually knew anything real. The hallways buzzed with whispers and theories getting wilder by the hour, with people making up stories about secret affairs lasting years, or them stealing school money to start a new life. Maya Estrada, the school counselor, started pulling kids from our psychology class out one by one during different periods to talk about what happened during the whole experiment thing. She had this worried look on her face every time she came to get someone, like she was trying to figure out how bad the damage was from Mrs. Lambert's crazy idea. Kids came back from her office looking confused or upset, and nobody wanted to say what she asked them about, which made everyone else more nervous about their turn. When she finally called me during math class, I followed her down the quiet hallway to her small office filled with motivational posters and a box of tissues on every surface. She sat across from me with her hands folded and asked how I was feeling about everything that happened with the experiment and finding out about the real affair. I told her I felt guilty about April getting blamed for something she didn't do, and confused about why Mrs. Lambert would mess with us like that, and weird about being rewarded just for asking if she was okay. Maya nodded and wrote notes while I talked, then asked if I thought the competition brought out the worst in people, or if it just showed who they really were underneath. The next day, I heard Jasmine's meeting went terrible, because she stormed out of Maya's office and slammed the door so hard the whole hallway heard it. Later that afternoon, Jasmine posted on Twitter that the school was punishing students for doing exactly what a teacher told them to do, which was total BS. But the tweet disappeared within an hour, probably because the school made her delete it. The volleyball team got their new coach that week, and it was Brad Harrell, who already coached assistant basketball, so he was doing double duty now. He seemed nice enough, but looked totally overwhelmed, especially when only half the volleyball team showed up to the first practice, because the other girls were too upset or embarrassed about everything. During Mrs. Lambert's class that same week, she walked in and taught like nothing had happened, but you could feel this thick tension in the air where nobody wanted to look at her directly. She assigned us a research paper on ethics in psychological experiments, which felt super pointed and made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats, knowing exactly why she picked that topic. The paper was due in 2 weeks, and she said we could work with partners, which normally would be exciting, but now just felt awkward since we all knew what happened last time she let us work together. A week after everything blew up, I was walking to my car after school when I saw Coach Lambert in the parking lot loading cardboard boxes into his truck. He looked way older than before, with dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders slumped down like he was carrying something heavy. When he noticed me watching, he just shook his head slowly and got in his truck, driving away without saying anything, which made me feel bad, even though he was the one who messed up. The cafeteria got a new permanent lunch lady to replace Mrs. Harden, who never came back to work after that day, and honestly, the new lady made way better food, especially the pizza. Some kids joked about how we should thank Coach Lambert for getting us better lunches, but it felt wrong laughing about something that wrecked so many people's lives. Kenji and I started drifting apart after everything because he kept saying I threw away the perfect chance for an easy grade, and he couldn't understand why I'd care more about Mrs. Lambert's feelings than my GPA. When Mrs. Lambert announced we could pick partners for the ethics paper, Kenji immediately turned to Jasmine and asked if she wanted to work together, which stung even though I knew I shouldn't care. They sat together now during class, comparing notes and whispering about their research, while I worked alone, trying not to feel like my best friend picked sides against me. 3 days before the paper was due, Mrs. Lambert asked me to stay after class, and when everyone left, she closed the door and sat on the edge of her desk. She told me her divorce papers were officially filed last week, and she already accepted a job at a different school district for next year because this place had too many memories and connections to pain she needed to escape from. Her eyes looked tired and sad, while she explained that every hallway and classroom reminded her of the betrayal, and she couldn't heal while surrounded by all these ghosts. She thanked me again for being the only student who showed real concern for her as a person, and said that small act of kindness meant more than I could understand during her darkest moment. Before I left, she handed me a letter of recommendation she wrote for colleges, saying I showed exceptional character and empathy, which would serve me well in whatever path I chose. Walking out of her classroom that day, I realized how much damage one experiment caused and how many lives got turned upside down because of a psychology lesson that went way too far. The next Monday morning, Principal McConnell called a mandatory assembly for all teachers during first period, and we had substitutes watching our classes while they sat through some kind of training about professional boundaries. I could hear some teachers grumbling in the hallway afterward about how they'd been teaching for 20 years without issues, but most of them seemed to get why the school had to do something after everything that happened. That same afternoon, I was walking past the gym when April caught up with me and grabbed my shoulder to stop me. She thanked me again for believing her when nobody else would, and said the rumors had finally died down now that people knew the truth about who Coach was really messing around with. She told me Brad was doing a great job as the new coach and actually knew how to teach volleyball instead of just yelling at them to hustle all the time. She said practice finally felt normal again without that weird tension, and she could focus on playing instead of watching her back. 3 weeks after everything blew up, my mom went to the school board meeting because parents were allowed, even though students weren't. She came home looking exhausted and told me it was a total mess with board members pointing fingers at each other about who should have caught this sooner. The superintendent kept trying to control the meeting, but parents were yelling about teacher oversight and demanding new policies, while board members argued about liability and lawsuits. Mom said one parent stood up and asked why a teacher was using students as investigators in the first place, which started a whole new round of shouting. The meeting went on for 3 hours, and nothing really got decided except they needed more meetings to figure out what went wrong. 2 days later, the district sent out an official email saying Coach Lambert had resigned and wouldn't be teaching anywhere in the state after his certification got revoked. The email also said Mrs. Harden resigned too, though they called it a mutual decision for everyone to move forward, which was their way of making it sound less bad. When Mrs. Lambert came back to teach after being gone for a few days, she was different in a way that's hard to explain. She still taught psychology well and knew her stuff, but there was something broken about her that made her seem smaller and more careful with everything she said. She stopped doing any experiments or demonstrations and just stuck to the textbook and worksheets, which made class boring but at least predictable. She assigned us that ethics paper about famous psychology experiments that went wrong, and everyone knew exactly why she picked that topic even though nobody said it out loud. The whole class ended up researching things like the Stanford prison experiment and the Milgram studies, and we all kept thinking about our own messed up experiment while we wrote. Working on those papers became this weird bonding thing where we'd share research in the library and talk about how psychologists could justify doing such terrible things to people. Kenji and Jasmine were partners and kept finding the most disturbing experiments while I worked alone reading about informed consent and ethical guidelines. After class one day, Jasmine waited for me by my locker and apologized for tackling us that day and for getting so caught up in winning that she forgot we were dealing with real people's lives. She said she felt bad about assuming April was involved in spreading those rumors before knowing the truth. It wasn't like we became friends or anything, but at least the weird hostility between us was gone, and we could be normal around each other. Maya started this lunch group for students to talk about ethical decision-making and peer pressure, which sounded super boring, but I went anyway because it felt like something positive might come from all this mess. Only 5 people showed up the first week, including me, and we sat in a circle eating our sandwiches while Maya asked us questions about times we felt pressured to do something wrong. One kid talked about cheating on a test and another mentioned shoplifting, but we all knew the real reason we were there was the whole investigation disaster. Maya didn't push us to talk about it directly, but she kept bringing up scenarios about authority figures, asking us to do questionable things, and how to recognize when something crosses a line. The volleyball team kept practicing with Brad and actually started winning games which nobody expected after losing their coach and dealing with all the drama. They made it to regionals for the first time in years, and April was playing better than ever, leading the team in kills and blocks. During the regional championship, she gave this speech about staying strong through adversity, and everyone in the gym knew exactly what she meant, even though she never mentioned the scandal directly. The team won in 5 sets, and when they held up the trophy, April looked right at me in the stands and mouthed, "Thank you," which made me feel good about standing up for her. The Monday after regionals, Mrs. Lambert stood at the front of class and announced she was taking a leave of absence for the rest of the semester, with a long-term substitute starting next week. Everyone stayed quiet because we could tell this was hard for her to say, and she kept fidgeting with her wedding ring that she still wore for some reason. After class, she asked me to stay behind, and when everyone left, she closed the door and sat on the edge of her desk like she used to before everything happened. She told me that out of all her students over the years, I was the only one who showed genuine concern for her as a person during that whole experiment disaster. She said I restored a little bit of her faith in humanity when I asked if she was actually okay that day in her classroom. The next Monday, a young guy walked into our psychology class carrying a stack of papers and wearing a tie that had cartoon brains all over it. He wrote Mr. Rodriguez on the board and told us he'd be taking over for Mrs. Lambert, who needed some personal time, which we all knew was code for dealing with her cheating husband and lying niece. Mr. Rodriguez tried doing this icebreaker game where we had to share our favorite psychological concept, but nobody was really into it at first because we were all still thinking about the mess from last week. He kept pushing, though, and started telling us about how he got interested in psychology after his brother had a mental breakdown in college, and it made him want to understand how the mind works. Something about him being so open about his own stuff made a few kids start participating, and by the end of class, people were actually asking questions about the next unit on memory formation. At lunch, Kenji found me by my locker and asked if we could talk, which surprised me since we hadn't really spoken since the whole investigation disaster. We sat at our old table in the corner of the cafeteria, and he started picking at his sandwich while I waited for him to say whatever he needed to say. He finally told me he felt bad about how crazy we both got trying to win that stupid grade, and how we basically ruined April's reputation for nothing. I admitted I felt the same way, and we both agreed we got way too caught up in the competition and forgot these were real people we were messing with. We weren't back to being best friends or anything, but at least we could joke around again about normal stuff like the terrible cafeteria pizza and Mr. Rodriguez's weird tie collection. 2 months passed, and things at the school had mostly gone back to normal when I ran into Mrs. Lambert at the grocery store near the frozen food section. She looked different, healthier somehow, with her hair cut shorter and wearing regular clothes instead of her usual teacher outfits. She smiled when she saw me and asked how Mr. Rodriguez was doing with the class, and I told her everyone liked him, even though he was kind of a dork. She laughed and said she was glad to hear it, then mentioned she was in therapy now and learning to trust people again after everything that happened with her ex-husband and niece. She even said she'd started dating someone new, a guy she met at her therapist's office who was there for his own divorce recovery, and they were taking things really slow, but it felt good to have hope again. Meanwhile, back at the school, they installed security cameras everywhere, including the cafeteria and all the office areas, which the principal said was for safety, but everyone knew it was because of what happened with Coach Lambert and Mrs. Unharden. Some kids complained about privacy and feeling watched all the time, but most of us understood why they needed to make sure nothing like that could happen again on the school property. The volleyball team was doing amazing with Brad Harrell as their new coach, and they actually started winning games for the first time in years. Abril pulled me aside after one of their victories to tell me how much better things were now that Brad was coaching, because he actually knew what he was doing, and treated them like athletes instead of whatever weird thing Coach Lambert had going on. She said the team felt more like a real family now, without all that creepy tension from before, and they could focus on actually playing volleyball instead of worrying about inappropriate comments or touches. The peer counseling program Maya recommended me for finally started up, and I found myself sitting in a circle with 5 other students, learning how to help mediate conflicts between our classmates. It was harder than I expected because kids came in with real problems like bullying and friend drama, and we had to figure out how to help them work through it without taking sides. Maya taught us active listening techniques and how to ask questions that helped people figure out their own solutions, instead of us just telling them what to do. Near the end of the semester, Principal McConnell called an assembly to announce new recognition programs for students who showed integrity and good character throughout the year. He didn't mention the whole investigation disaster directly, but everyone knew that's what inspired these new awards for doing the right thing, even when it's hard. He said they wanted to focus on positive reinforcement instead of just punishing bad behavior, and would be giving out certificates and small scholarships to students who demonstrated ethical decision-making. One morning, Mr. De Rodriguez walked in with an envelope and said Mrs. Lambert had sent our class a letter from her new school where she was teaching now. He read it out loud, and she said she was doing well and had learned as much from us as we learned from her, even though it wasn't the lesson she originally planned. She apologized again for the experiment and said she hoped we all understood ethics better now, even if we had to learn it the hard way through real consequences instead of textbook examples. The district sent out a memo to all teachers about new rules for grade incentives and what they could offer students for assignments, which basically meant no more crazy promises like guaranteed A's for doing weird tasks. Everything had to be standard extra credit within reason, and teachers couldn't make deals that might encourage unethical behavior or put students in uncomfortable positions. The biggest surprise came when Jasmine wrote an article for the school paper, completely clearing April's name and explaining how we'd all jumped to wrong conclusions based on circumstantial evidence. She interviewed April and several volleyball players who confirmed that while Coach Lambert made inappropriate comments sometimes, nothing physical ever happened with any students. After the article came out, Jasmine and April actually started hanging out, and I'd see them laughing together at lunch sometimes, which made me smile because something good came out of all that mess. The next week, Maya called Kenji into her office, and when he came out, he was actually smiling for real, not his usual smirk. He told me Maya recommended him for the peer counseling program too, after seeing how much he'd grown from everything that happened. We started meeting twice a week after school, learning conflict resolution techniques and practicing role-playing scenarios with the other counselors. Kenji surprised everyone by being really good at it, especially when dealing with kids who got caught up in competition and forgot about consequences. We worked together on this presentation about thinking through what might happen before you act on assumptions, using examples from our own mistakes without naming specific people. The presentation went so well that Maya asked us to give it to all the freshman classes next year. Spring rolled around, and the school announced they were adding character awards to the senior ceremony for the first time ever. Nobody was surprised when they called my name for the Integrity Award, even though I felt super weird about it. My parents went crazy taking pictures and immediately stopped at the frame store on the way home to get the certificate mounted. Mom kept telling everyone at the grocery store about it, which made me want to disappear into the floor. Summer break started, and I was working at the pool when my mom showed me something on Facebook. Mrs. Lambert had posted wedding photos from her new marriage to some guy she met at her new school. The wedding looked small, but she was smiling bigger than I'd ever seen her smile in class. It seemed really fast to get married after everything, but I hoped she found someone who would treat her right this time. September came, and walking into school felt different with all the new rules and procedures they'd put in place. Security cameras covered every hallway now, and teachers had to keep their doors open during one-on-one meetings with students. The new freshmen had no idea why everything was so strict and structured, but it was probably better they didn't know the whole story. Throughout senior year, I watched Abril dominate on the volleyball court, and Scout started showing up to every game. She led the team to state championships, and everyone talked about her serves and spikes instead of old rumors. Right before graduation, she pulled me aside after the final home game to tell me she'd gotten a full scholarship to state. She grabbed me in this huge hug and whispered thanks for believing her when everyone else was ready to throw her under the bus. Her parents were crying happy tears in the stands, and Brad was telling everyone who would listen that he always knew she'd make it big. Maya found me at my locker the week before graduation and told me the peer counseling program had already prevented 3 major conflicts this year. She said the techniques we developed from our presentation were being used district-wide now, and kids were learning to slow down and think before acting on gossip. Kenji and I had counseled 2 different friend groups through drama that could have blown up like ours did, but we helped them talk it out instead. Graduation day arrived, and Principal McConnell stood at the podium talking about how our class had faced unique challenges and learned hard lessons. He said we discovered the importance of truth, consequences, and treating people with respect without mentioning the specific events, but everyone knew exactly what he meant. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats while we just wanted him to hurry up so we could throw our caps and be done with high school. After the ceremony ended and everyone was taking pictures, I stood there watching my classmates celebrate and realized something important. Mrs. Lambert's experiment taught us way more than she planned, but not about competitive behavior like she intended. We learned how fast we judge others when we think there's something to gain, and how easy it is to believe the worst about people we don't really know. Most importantly, we learned to see people as actual humans with feelings and families and complicated lives, instead of just players in our own personal dramas trying to get ahead. That's the end, folks. Bet you didn't think you'd stick it out this long, huh? If you're still here, might as well subscribe and make it official.